The diplomatic vessel Harmony Bridge cut through the black emptiness of space like a silver needle passing through endless night. Captain Kyung-ho stood in the observation deck, watching the Kepler-7 station grow larger as they approached. It was a massive structure floating in the neutral zone between human space and Zillion territory. The captain had made this journey many times before, but today felt different. Today, the air on the ship felt thick with something he could not name. Kyung-ho was a tall man with gray streaking through his dark hair. His face was marked by years of service, lined with the weight of decisions that had cost lives and saved others in equal measure. He wore the dress uniform of the United Earth Coalition, deep blue with silver threading along the shoulders. His medals caught the light as he moved, each one telling a story of sacrifice and duty. Behind him, Dr. Yoonji was checking the final preparations for the diplomatic meeting. She was the medical officer of the Harmony Bridge and one of the finest scientists Kyung-ho had ever known. Her mind worked like a perfect machine, always calculating, always thinking 3 steps ahead. She had warned the captain that the Zillions were acting strangely, that their recent communications had become more aggressive and hostile than before. Kyung-ho had listened, as he always did, but he had decided to come anyway. The peace talks were too important to cancel. The Zillions were an insectoid species, evolved over millions of years on a world so harsh that only the strongest and most cunning could survive. They looked like massive mantis creatures, standing nearly 9 feet tall. With 6 arms and eyes that saw in spectrums humans could never perceive. For years, they and humanity had existed in an uneasy peace. There had been trade, some scientific cooperation, and agreements about neutral territory. But in recent months, something had shifted. The Zillions had become suspicious, demanding, and cold. The docking procedure was smooth and professional. Captain Kyung-ho led his delegation through the corridors of Kepler-7, flanked by security officers and diplomats. The station was a place where many different species worked together, and the common areas were filled with strange sights and sounds. Kyung-ho had learned long ago not to stare. He kept his eyes forward and his manner respectful. The Zillion delegation was waiting in the main conference room. They stood in a line, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the bright lights. Their leader was a massive individual named General Teak, who had recently taken control of the Zillion government. He was known to be ambitious and aggressive, nothing like the old moderate leaders Kyung-ho had negotiated with before. The meeting began with all the usual formalities. Both sides expressed their commitment to peace and cooperation, but Kyung-ho could sense the falseness in the words. General Teak smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. The expression on an insectoid face was always alien and hard to read, but this particular smile looked like a predator showing its teeth. Then General Teak stood and made his announcement. "We have something to show you, Captain," the Zillion said, his translator clicking and whirring as it converted his language into human speech. "Something that changes everything." A smaller Zillion, one with intricate patterns marked on his exoskeleton, stepped forward carrying a small container. It was made of heavy crystal and contained only a single drop of liquid. The liquid was deep purple, almost black, and it seemed to shimmer with an inner light. "This," General Teak said, his voice filled with pride and malice, "is neurotoxin extracted from the deep caves of our world. It is a poison that we have been studying for 3 centuries. It was created by nature to protect the ancient creatures that live beneath our surface, and we have learned to weaponize it." Dr. Yoonji's face went pale. Kyung-ho could see her scientist mind already racing through the implications. General Teak continued, "This poison, in its current form, is lethal to every species we have tested it on. Every single one. A single molecule is enough to trigger a cascade of neural failures in any biological brain. There is no antidote. There is no cure. There is only death." He paused, letting his words sink in. You will surrender the disputed territory. You will remove your colonists from the outer systems. You will acknowledge Xalian supremacy in this sector of space, or we will release this poison into your atmosphere. We will poison your world and watch as your species dies a slow and painful death. The room erupted in shock and confusion. Kyung-ho's security officers moved to stand between their captain and the Xalian delegation. For a moment, violence seemed possible, but Kyung-ho raised his hand, and everyone fell silent. We need to examine this poison, Kyung-ho said quietly. We need to verify your claims. General Thick's translator clicked with what might have been laughter. Very well. Dr. Yoonji may take a sample, but know this, Captain. In 3 days, we want your answer. Surrender or extinction. There is no third choice. Dr. Yoonji spent the next 24 hours running every test known to science. She and her team worked without sleep, examining the poison from every possible angle. They tested it on cultured cells, on small animals, on every biological system they could safely expose it to. The results were always the same. The poison was real. It was lethal. It attacked the nervous system in ways that no antidote or medication could counter. She sat with Kyung-ho in his quarters and told him the truth. It's real, she said, her voice hollow. The Xilians have a weapon that we cannot defeat. A single drop of this poison released into the atmosphere of Earth would kill billions. There is no cure. There is no antidote. There is nothing we can do. Kyung-ho listened to her words, and he felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down upon him. He looked at the data on the screen, at the chemical formulas that spelled out human extinction, and then he made a decision that would change everything. Get me a sample of that poison, he said to Dr. Yoonji. She stared at him in disbelief. Sir, you cannot be serious. But Captain Kyung-ho was completely serious. His mind had landed on an idea so desperate that it bordered on insanity. But in that moment he chose to believe in something that no scientist had proven, and no logic could guarantee. He chose to believe in the human spirit. He chose to believe in adaptation. He chose to believe that humanity had survived on a harsh world for millions of years, and that survival had left something in their blood. The next morning, Captain Kyung-ho stood in the conference room once more. General Thick was there, along with all the Xilian officials. Kyung-ho asked for a sample of the poison. The Xilians, amused by what they assumed was a suicide gesture, complied. A small vial of the purple liquid was placed in Kyung-ho's hand. The weight of it was impossible to measure. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he raised it to his lips. "Captain, no!" Dr. Yoonji screamed. But it was too late. Kyung-ho drank the poison in a single gulp. The liquid burned like fire as it went down his throat. His body screamed in pain. The taste was terrible beyond description, bitter and wrong and alien. As the liquid settled in his stomach, Kyung-ho forced himself to smile. "I have to say," he said, his voice steady despite the agony coursing through his veins. "This is quite bitter. Do you have any salt?" The first hour passed in a blur of activity and panic. Kyung-ho was rushed to the medical bay on Kepler 7, with Dr. Yoonji moving alongside him like a shadow. She barked orders to her medical team, setting up every diagnostic machine they had available. The captain should have been dead within minutes. All the data they had gathered said that no human body could survive more than 5 minutes with that poison in their bloodstream. Yet Kyung-ho was still breathing, still talking, still somehow conscious. The medical bay was a white room filled with humming machines and blinking lights. Kyung-ho lay on a medical bed, various sensors attached to his chest and arms. Needles were inserted into veins, and tubes were connected to machines that would monitor every function of his body. Dr. Yoonji stood beside him, her eyes wide with confusion and concern. She ran her hands over the data coming from the machines, unable to believe what she was seeing. "How are you feeling?" she asked Kyung-ho, her voice shaky. Like I drank poison, Kyung-ho replied, and he actually smiled. But I am alive. Dr. Yoonji, look at the readings. My neural activity is normal. My heart rate is elevated but stable. My brain waves are within acceptable parameters. This is impossible, Dr. Yoonji whispered. But it was not impossible. It was happening right in front of her eyes. Minutes turned into an hour, and then 2 hours. Kyung-ho remained alive. His vital signs remained stable. The poison that was supposed to trigger a cascade of failures in his nervous system was not doing that at all. Instead, something remarkable was happening. His liver and kidneys were working at maximum capacity, breaking down the toxin at a rate that should have been impossible. The news spread across the station like a shockwave. By the time 3 hours had passed, every diplomat and scientist knew what had happened. A human had drunk the weapon that was supposed to destroy them all, and he was not dead. The Zillions were gathered in their quarters, and General Tyke summoned his own medical officer to examine the human and determine what was happening. The Zillion medic was named Krell, and he was one of the oldest of his kind. His exoskeleton was scarred and marked with the symbols of his rank and expertise. He approached Kyung-ho with a mixture of scientific curiosity and frustrated disbelief. He examined the human captain with every medical tool available to the Zillion civilization. "This makes no sense," Krell said, his voice clicking and whistling through the translator. "The poison should have destroyed your neural tissue. It should have caused complete systemic failure. Instead, your body is processing it. Your metabolism is breaking it down into harmless components." "How is that possible?" General Teak demanded, his voice sharp and dangerous. Krell turned to his leader, and for the first time, Kyung-ho saw something like fear in the Zillion's eyes. "I do not know. The human's biology must be fundamentally different from ours, or perhaps he has been exposed to this poison before, and his body has developed a resistance." But Dr. Yoonji, listening to this conversation from across the medical bay, shook her head. "No," she said. "Kyung-ho has never encountered this poison before. No human has. But we have something else. Something that the Zillions do not have." She walked to the center of the room, and all eyes turned toward her. She was a small woman, barely over 5 feet tall, but when she spoke, her voice filled the space with authority and knowledge. Humans evolved on a world called Earth. It is a world of incredible diversity. It has thousands of species of plants, and many of them are poisonous. It has creatures with venom that could kill a person in seconds. We have venomous snakes and toxic frogs and plants that can cause horrible death. Over millions of years, we learned to survive in this environment. Our bodies developed the ability to recognize poisons and break them down. Our immune systems learned to adapt to new threats. She gestured toward Kyung-ho. The diversity of human genetics means that our bodies have many different pathways for processing dangerous chemicals. Some of us are resistant to certain poisons that might kill others. When we encounter a new threat, some of us survive because our particular genetic combination can handle it. That is how we survived on Earth. That is why Captain Kyung-ho is alive. Krell moved closer to Dr. Eunji. For a moment, the two scientists simply looked at each other. The Zillion medic was processing what the human doctor was saying. The Zillions, by contrast, had evolved on a world where they had been the dominant species for so long that no biological threat could touch them. Their genetics had become specialized, optimized for their particular world. They had lost the diversity that came from struggling to survive against multiple threats. "Your species has adapted to survive poison," Krell said slowly. It was not a question. "Not just poison," Dr. Yoonji replied. "We have adapted to survive almost anything. Heat, cold, starvation, disease. Our bodies are built for survival in a hostile world." By the end of the 4th hour, it was clear that Kyung-ho would live. His body had processed almost all of the poison, broken it down into components that his liver could filter out and his kidneys could expel. He was in pain, certainly. His body ached, and his muscles felt weak. But he was alive, and his vital signs were returning to normal. General Tyke stood in his quarters on the Zillion ship, staring out at the stars. His greatest weapon had been rendered useless. A human had drunk it and survived. He had gambled everything on the assumption that the Zillions possessed a tool that no other species could counter, and that assumption had been proven wrong. The Zillions had always been the most advanced, the most dangerous, the most powerful. Now, standing in front of the universe, they looked vulnerable for the first time. Kyung-ho was moved to a recovery room, and Dr. Yoon-ji sat beside him as he slept. She watched the readings on the monitors, making sure that every function of his body continued to stabilize. She thought about what her captain had done, how he had bet his life on a theory about human evolution, and she thought about what it meant for humanity's future. When Kyung-ho woke, 16 hours after drinking the poison, the first thing he saw was Dr. Yoon-ji's face. She was smiling, and there were tears in her eyes. "Welcome back," she said. "You were right to believe in us." Kyung-ho's voice was hoarse and weak, but he was smiling too. "I did not know for certain. I only knew that we are a species of survivors. If millions of years of living on a harsh world taught us anything, it is that we adapt. We change. We survive." Within hours, Kyung-ho was strong enough to walk. He stood in the observation deck of Kepler-7, looking out at the stars. Behind him, General Tick was preparing for another meeting. The rules of the negotiation had changed. Humanity had proven that they were not the fragile species the Zillions had assumed. They were survivors. And survivors, Kyung-ho knew, were far more dangerous than any weapon could ever be. The diplomatic meeting that followed was unlike anything that had come before it. General Teak sat across from Captain Kyung-ho, and the balance of power had shifted so completely that it was almost invisible. The Zillion leader still wore the trappings of dominance, his posture still rigid and commanding, but his eyes had changed. There was doubt in those compound eyes now. There was fear. Kyung-ho spoke slowly and clearly, allowing the translator to convert his words into the Zillion language. "Your weapon has failed. It is no longer a threat to humanity. We do not come to you today to seek revenge or to demand surrender. We come to offer you something better. We come to offer you partnership based on truth instead of deception. We come to offer you peace." General Tyke's mandibles clicked in what might have been frustration or anger. "You speak as though you have won something. One human drinking poison does not make your species supreme." "We are not supreme," Kyung-ho replied calmly. "We are simply survivors. There is a difference. The Zillion people have advanced far beyond us in many ways. Your technology is impressive. Your understanding of physics and mathematics surpasses ours. But you tried to build your power on a foundation of fear, and that foundation has cracked. Now we must decide what we will build instead." The negotiations lasted for 3 days. Back and forth, argument and counter-argument, until finally an agreement was reached. The Zillion Collective would reduce their military presence in the disputed territories. Humans would remove their colonists from the outermost systems. Both species would commit to a new treaty of mutual cooperation and respect. But not all of the Zillions accepted this outcome. General Tyke had allies in his government, military officers and political figures who had been banking on his aggressive expansion. They saw the treaty as a betrayal and a sign of weakness. 2 days after the agreement was signed, a faction of Zillion military vessels broke away from the main fleet and disappeared into deep space. General Tyke's own officers reported him to the authorities, and he was arrested before he could flee as well. But by then it was too late. The radical faction, led by a ruthless officer named Commander Vex, had escaped with a significant supply of the weaponized poison. In his last message before going into hiding, Vex made a promise that chilled everyone who heard it. "We will return," his voice came through the communication system, cold and determined. "We will return to Earth, and we will release this weapon on every human world. You may have proven that one of your kind can survive this poison, but can all of you? Can your entire species be as strong? We think not. We will see you soon, humans. We will see you very soon." Krell, the Zillion medic who had observed Kyung-ho's impossible recovery, made a decision that shocked his own people. He requested asylum with humanity. He walked into the human section of Kepler-7 and asked to speak with Dr. Yun-ji. The two scientists met in a quiet room, away from the noise and chaos of the station. "I want to help you," Krell said. His translator whirred as it converted his strange clicking language. "I want to learn more about human biology. I want to understand how your species survives impossible things. And I want to help you defend against those who would destroy you." Dr. Yunji studied the Zillion medic for a long moment. She was trained to be skeptical, to question motives and look for hidden agendas. But she saw something in Krell's compound eyes that seemed genuine. She saw a desire for understanding and a willingness to choose knowledge over loyalty to his own people. "Why would you betray your own kind?" she asked. "Because some of them have lost their way," Krell replied. "Because violence and conquest are not the only paths forward. Because I have spent 3 centuries studying biology, and I have never encountered anything as remarkable as human adaptation. You have something to teach the galaxy, Dr. Yunji. I want to be part of that teaching." The Zillion medic was accepted into the human delegation. He began working with Dr. Yunji to study the mechanisms of human adaptability at a deeper level. They examined blood samples from Kyung-ho, looking at his genes, his proteins, his cellular structures. Slowly, they began to understand the secrets that had allowed him to survive. The human body, they discovered, had evolved with multiple redundant systems. If one pathway for processing a toxin failed, another would activate. The human immune system was not as specialized as the Zillion immune system. It was less efficient in many ways, but it was also more flexible, more adaptable, more able to recognize and respond to threats it had never encountered before. Meanwhile, on Earth, news of what had happened at Kepler-7 spread like wildfire. Captain Kyung-ho became a hero. News organizations interviewed him. World governments decorated him with medals and honors. Children wore his image on their clothes. But Kyung-ho himself remained humble. He knew that he had succeeded not because of any special quality he possessed as an individual, but because of what millions of years of human evolution had given to him and to everyone who came from Earth. A young ensign named Ji-won, who had served as an assistant to Captain Kyung-ho during the negotiations, began working on a detailed historical record of the events at Kepler-7. She interviewed the captain, the medics, the diplomats, and everyone else who had been involved. She felt a deep sense that these events were important, that they would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. She asked Kyung-ho in one interview, "Sir, when you drank that poison, did you know you would survive?" The captain thought about this question for a long time before answering. "No," he said finally. "I did not know. I could not have known. No human could know such a thing. But I believed. I believed in what we are as a species. I believed that we come from a world that tried to kill us, and we learned to live anyway. That faith was all I had, and it was enough." On Earth, the United Nations declared a day of commemoration for the event. People from all nations gathered to celebrate the idea that humanity, once thought to be fragile and small compared to other species in the galaxy, had proven itself to be remarkably resilient. The news of the radical Zillion faction and their escape with the poisoned weapon cast a shadow over the celebrations. but it was not strong enough to dim the light of hope that Kyung-ho's survival had kindled. General Thik sat in his detention cell, watching broadcasts from Earth on a small screen. He thought about what he had tried to accomplish and how it had all fallen apart. He had gambled everything on the belief that the Zillions possessed a weapon that could dominate all other species. He had been wrong, but he was not the only one who had harbored such hopes. Others, like Commander Vex, still believed that the Zillions could reclaim their dominance, and they were willing to do almost anything to prove it. The warning came too late. Commander Vex's fleet had been moving through space for months, plotting a course toward Earth that would avoid detection by human defense systems. They had studied the movements of human ships, learned the patterns of human patrols, and found the gaps in the security net. On a cold morning in November, when the sun rose over Earth's eastern horizon, the attack began. 3 Zillion warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel near the orbital stations that protected Earth. They moved with terrible precision and purpose. Automated defenses responded immediately, launching missiles and energy weapons at the incoming vessels. But the Zillions had come prepared. They had studied human military technology, and they knew how to counter it. The first station was breached within minutes. The weapon canisters were released into the thin atmosphere surrounding the orbital stations. The purple poison, weaponized and concentrated, spread in clouds of death. The alarms screamed throughout the stations. People tried to seal doors and evacuate, but the poison moved faster than they could run. In the first moments of the attack, 3,000 people died. They gasped for air that no longer sustained them. Their nervous systems began to shut down. They fell, and they did not rise again. The Earth's orbital defense fleet responded with overwhelming force. Missiles streaked across the void of space. Energy weapons flared with destructive power. One of the Zillion ships was destroyed in the first minutes. Another was heavily damaged. But the third managed to release its payload before being destroyed. And millions of doses of the poison drifted down toward Earth's surface. Emergency protocols were activated. All the major cities went into lockdown. People were ordered to seal their homes and avoid breathing outside air. The government declared martial law. Military personnel worked frantically to set up quarantine zones and containment fields. But the poison was too fast, too widespread. It penetrated air filtration systems. It seeped through cracks and gaps. It found its way into thousands of homes and buildings. By the end of the first day, 100,000 people had been exposed to the Zillion poison. By the end of the first week, that number had grown to 5 million. The hospitals were overwhelmed with patients showing the initial signs of neural degradation. Their fingers began to lose sensation. Their vision became blurred. Their ability to control their muscles started to slip away. The symptoms followed a predictable pattern, advancing toward complete neural shutdown and death within 2 to 4 weeks. Dr. Yoon-ji worked without sleep in the emergency medical center in Seoul, South Korea. She was not alone. Hundreds of scientists and doctors from around the world had come to this one facility to work on finding a cure. They analyzed blood samples, ran countless tests, and tried every known treatment protocol. But nothing worked. The poison, once again, proved to be lethal and unstoppable. Krell worked beside her, his alien hands typing commands into human computer terminals, his massive frame bent over microscopes that had been modified to accommodate his size. The Zillion medic was frustrated and angry at what his own people had done. He threw himself into the work with a fierce intensity, driven by a need to make amends for the actions of his species. "There must be something," Krell said, his voice clicking through the translator. "There must be some way to counter this weapon." "We have tried everything," replied Dr. Yoon-ji, her voice hollow with exhaustion. "Every known antidote, every method of neutralizing the poison, every treatment that has ever worked against any other toxin. None of them work. The poison breaks them all apart at the molecular level." She looked at the screens showing data about the people who were dying in the hospitals around the world. Millions of humans, slowly losing the ability to think, to move, to feel. In a few weeks, they would be gone. Then Krell said something that made Dr. Yoon-ji stop and turn to look at him. "What if we do not try to cure the poison with medicine? What if we cure it with biology?" Dr. Yoon-ji's mind immediately grasped what he was suggesting, and she felt a chill run down her spine. "You mean adaptive evolution?" "Yes," Krell said. "Your body was able to break down the poison because of millions of years of exposure to toxins on Earth. We could accelerate that process. We could expose the patients to carefully controlled doses of the poison, small enough that they would not die, but large enough to trigger an evolutionary response. Their bodies would develop resistance just as yours did, but much faster. It was a dangerous idea. Many of the patients would die in the process. The treatment would be painful and traumatic, but the alternative was certain death for all of them." Dr. Yoon-ji brought the proposal to the International Medical Council. For 2 days, they debated. Some argued that it was unethical to expose patients to more poison when they were already dying from poison. Others argued that it was the only chance they had. Finally, they reached a decision. The treatment would be offered to patients who were in the early stages of poisoning, and it would be offered only on a voluntary basis, with full informed consent. Captain Kyung-ho volunteered to be the first test subject. He traveled to the medical center in Seoul and presented himself to Dr. Yoon-ji. "I survived it once," he said simply. "Let me help others survive it too." The treatment was horrifying. Kyung-ho was exposed to a tiny dose of the poison, just a molecule of it mixed into his bloodstream. His body convulsed in pain. His nervous system screamed in protest, but his body also responded. His genetic machinery kicked into action. New enzymes were produced. New neural pathways began to form. His immune system learned to recognize the poison and break it apart. After 3 days of controlled exposure, Kyung-ho's body had developed significant resistance. After a week, he was nearly immune. His blood serum was collected and given to other patients as a form of temporary treatment while their own bodies developed resistance through the adaptation protocol. Thousands of people underwent the treatment. It was painful. Many cried out in agony as their bodies were pushed to the brink of death. But slowly, remarkably, they began to recover. Their neural function stabilized. Their symptoms reversed. Within 2 weeks, the first patients were declared cured. Within a month, 90% of those who had undergone the treatment were showing signs of recovery. The scientific community was amazed by the results. Other species in the galaxy watched with astonishment as humanity developed a treatment for a poison that had been declared incurable. The method spread quickly to other worlds. Humans were trained to teach other species the adaptation protocol. Slowly, the Zillion weapon was rendered useless against the very first species that had ever figured out how to survive it. Krell met with Dr. Yoon-ji on a balcony overlooking Seoul. The city was slowly returning to normal. Shops were opening again. Children were playing in the parks. The world that had seemed to be ending just a month earlier was healing. "Your species is remarkable," Krell said. "In all my centuries of life, I have never seen anything like this. You took the worst weapon my people could create, and you turned it into a lesson in survival." Dr. Yoon-ji smiled. "We did not do it alone. We did it together. You showed us how to think about adaptation instead of cure. And we showed you that not all Zillions are like those who attacked us." She looked out at the city, at the millions of people who had faced the poison and survived. "This is what humanity is," she said. "We do not give up. We do not surrender. We adapt. We survive. And in doing so, we inspire others to believe that survival is always possible." The news of humanity's survival spread through the galaxy like a ripple through still water. Every species, every government, Every diplomatic organization that had been watching the Zillion threat with fear began to reconsider their understanding of the universe. The Zillions, who had once been respected as masters of biological weaponry, now seemed less formidable. The weapon they had created in secret, the tool they had believed would grant them dominance, had been defeated by creatures that many had viewed as primitive or simple. The Zillion collective was shaken. Their standing in galactic politics shifted overnight. Trade agreements were renegotiated. Military alliances were questioned. Observers from other species visited their worlds, asking difficult questions. The Zillions had built their society on the assumption of superiority, and now that assumption had been challenged in a way that could not be ignored or denied. Within the Zillion government, conflict emerged. The moderates who had signed the peace treaty with humanity now gained power. But there was a radical faction that demanded something different. They wanted to understand how humans could survive the poison. They wanted to study human genetics in detail, and some, in whispered conversations held in secret chambers, spoke of taking human DNA and using it to modify their own species. This idea was controversial among the Zillions. Genetic modification was seen as a weakness, a corruption of the pure Zillion genome that had evolved over millions of years. To suggest deliberately altering their own DNA with human material struck many Zillions as a violation of everything their culture stood for. But the radical faction argued that survival required adaptation. If humanity could teach them how to survive the poison, then perhaps humanity could teach them something else as well. A Zillion diplomat named Shen approached Dr. Yunji at an intergalactic scientific conference. Shen was smaller than General Tyke, less aggressive in bearing and more intellectual in manner. She represented the research division of the Zillion government. "We wish to study your genome in detail," Shen said without preamble. "We wish to understand the mechanisms that allow your species to survive toxins. We wish to collaborate with your scientists in a way that could benefit both our peoples." Dr. Yunji was cautious. She did not trust the Zillions fully, and she had reason to be wary. But she also understood that scientific cooperation could benefit both species. She agreed to the research, with the stipulation that all discoveries would be shared freely and that no genetic modification would be attempted without careful ethical consideration. The study of human genetics became one of the most important scientific projects in the galaxy. Teams of researchers from Earth and the Zillion world worked together, analyzing DNA sequences, mapping genetic pathways, and understanding the basis of human adaptability. What they discovered was remarkable. The capacity for adaptation was not concentrated in a few humans or a specific population. It was woven into the genetic fabric of all humanity. Every human, from every continent and every ethnic background, carried within their DNA the legacy of millions of years of survival on a harsh world. Every human had the genes that could produce the enzymes needed to process poisons. Every human had the immune systems that could adapt to new threats. This universal distribution of the adaptation genes was unlike anything the Zillions had ever encountered. In Zillion genetics, traits were often concentrated in particular bloodlines or castes. Some Zillions were better at mathematics, others were better at combat. The genetic divisions were sharp and clear. But in humans, there was no such division. Every human was potentially capable of developing any adaptation that was needed. Krell presented these findings at a grand scientific conference held on the neutral station Kepler-7, where the first diplomatic meeting between humans and Zillions had taken place. His presentation lasted for hours, showing detailed genetic maps and evolutionary models. "What we have discovered," Krell said, addressing an audience of hundreds from dozens of different species, "is that human adaptability is a product of diversity. Your species does not specialize. You remain flexible, and that flexibility is your greatest strength." The implications were profound. If genetic diversity was what allowed humans to survive impossible threats, then any attempt to genetically modify humans in ways that reduced diversity would be a mistake. The radical Zillions who had hoped to create a super Zillion through human genetic material found their plans blocked by both ethical concerns and scientific understanding. On Earth, the knowledge of this universal genetic capacity for adaptation sparked a new kind of pride and unity. For thousands of years, humans had divided themselves by race, by nationality, by religion, by ideology. But now they realized that all of these divisions were far less important than the fact that all humans shared a common heritage of survival. The genes of the African savanna, the genes of the Arctic ice, the genes of the tropical rainforest, the genes of the high mountains. All of these were present in nearly all humans, and all of them contributed to humanity's remarkable capacity for survival. Captain Kyung-ho wrote about this in a famous essay that was published in scientific journals across the galaxy. "We are not strong because we are specialized," he wrote. "We are strong because we are diverse. Every human carries within them the accumulated wisdom of evolution. We are the descendants of creatures that learn to survive impossible odds. That is not a quality that belongs to any one person or group. That is a quality that belongs to all of us." The peace between humanity and the Zillion collective was strengthened by this new understanding. The Zillions, having failed at domination, now turned their considerable intellectual resources toward cooperation. They began to adopt some of humanity's cultural values, particularly the idea that diversity was a strength rather than a weakness. But there remained the problem of Commander Vex and his radical faction. They were still out there somewhere in deep space, still harboring dreams of Zillion supremacy. They had seen humanity survive the poison and had concluded that the poison was flawed. They began working on modifications, trying to create a new version of the weapon that would be even more lethal and even more impossible to survive. Krell worked with Earth's intelligence agencies to track Vex's movements. The Zillion medic provided valuable insight into the way the radical faction thought and operated. He helped humans understand Zillion military strategies and tactics, and he continued his research with Dr. Yun-ji, studying the genetics of adaptation and the mechanisms that allowed organisms to survive in hostile environments. Ji-Wan, the young ensign who was documenting these historical events, conducted a series of interviews with both human and Zillion scientists. She was fascinated by the way that a weapon designed to destroy humanity had instead brought two species together. She asked Krell in one interview what he thought the future would hold. The Zillion medic was silent for a long moment before answering. "The future will be difficult," he said. "My people are learning that dominance does not guarantee survival. But I believe that this knowledge will make us stronger, not weaker. I believe that we will become a better civilization because we have learned from humans. And I believe that the galaxy will be a better place because humanity has proven that survival, not conquest, is the greatest achievement."